Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It's Chris, and we are talking this week about cannibal chickens. And also, there was a local fire nearby in the town of just outside the town of Bullengarook. Fortunately, it's been put out, but it's been a very dry year. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get into talking about things. A person can learn a lot in a week. 8 days ago, my mind was reeling from the realities of having to cull the flock of chickens of some of its more obstreperous birds. Four of the larger and older chickens had decided to beat the daylights out of two young hens we'd introduced only months ago. Those two youngies, well, they were like the proverbial chook roadkill. Prior to our speedy intervention, and we saved them in a nick of time, they're in the initial phases of being eaten alive. The older and larger chooks were actually pecking the backs of these two young birds. They were pretty young and naive. Anyway, it's not nice, and who says that chickens are vegetarians? Also, the older hens unwisely messed up, given that this was their second and final warning. Fortunately, being of a stoic disposition, I was undeterred from consuming a tasty gourmet chicken burger for lunch that day. It just made me 25 minutes late for a catch up with friends. Totally unforgivable. The two young hens, well, they're now recovering from their ordeal, which was a couple of weeks ago. The incident has started my brain cogitating upon what went wrong. Mind you, this is not the first encounter I've had with cannibal chickens. No way. We've kept egg-laying birds for over 15 years now, and during that time a person tries out all sorts of different breeds to see how they'll go. In these more enlightened days, we tend to stick to heritage breeds of the sort your grandmother would recognise. But early on, the allure of the commercial birds, which lay an enormous number of eggs, it was just too great to resist. And we're talking the Australian varieties, which are Isa Browns, and I think they call them Highline in the US. Yeah, but anyway, now I know. Sometimes I just disappoint even myself with the choices made. At first, the commercial bird breeds, they worked out wonderfully. Sure, they ate a lot and they demanded a high protein diet. But I mean, look at the number of eggs produced. Mostly the chickens here get to live out a pleasant life once their egg laying days are done, and they only usually lay in bulk for about 4 years, 5 years. But even after the egg laying days are over, the conversion of plant matter into high grade manure, it's an excellent resource. It's worth mentioning that a combination of the soil bedding straw, which contains a lot of carbon, and chicken poop, which contains a lot of nitrogen, is a fine plant food which improves soils in a way in which the individual components won't do nearly as well. But burning fast and burning bright can be something of an issue for everything else around such efficient and powerful forces of nature, like those commercial breeds. We discovered that by about the age of 2 with the commercial breeds, they suddenly go psychotic. And this is why in commercial egg-laying farms, the farmers will and cut the beaks. So every time you'll go, oh, I saved this commercial bird, go, I don't know what happened to its beak. And I go, well, they probably did that to stop the birds from killing each other. Anyway, years ago, the day those commercial birds ate my favourite little black silky chicken, well, it still haunts me. The little fluffy fave ended up with a massive gaping hole in her back, and she was unable to walk after that. So in addition to abandoning the idea of chickens as pets, the silky was given the coup de grace, and the miscreant commercial birds were publicly executed within the enclosure. Truly, it sends a strong statement to the other birds, and that situation hasn't been repeated until very recently. The heavy, sharp knife makes quick work of the 4 foul birds this week. Please excuse the pun. The blade, by the way, it's a Gurkha replica piece purchased from a store in Kathmandu in Nepal. And we travelled to that country late last century and walked around the higher points of the less visited western parts, the Annapurna part of the range, for about 18 days. It was a beautiful and very quiet and lovely country. Although I get the impression that many parts of the world are over touristed nowadays. And so, look, we haven't journeyed anywhere for maybe a quarter of a century, give or take a year. Digressions aside, the chicken enclosure has become a quiet and peaceful place. There's even a new boss chicken, the smaller white with the grey neck. I think she's a light Sussex. And she'll give all the other birds a good what for. However, she's not attempted to eat the others of the flock either, so she's probably winning. The public knifing display has had a desired effect. There are, however, two larger and older birds who was a bit on the fence about as to whether they're involved in defining the two young chickens as a fast food takeaway option. Those possible bullies have been unceremoniously chucked into a small cage within the enclosure where they can consider the wisdom of their actions at leisure. And I call that cage the sin bin. So the two youngsters, and they're the small black chickens you can see in the foreground of the previous image, they're now recovering from their wounds and are happily learning how to be a chicken. Look, it's hard to know whether they're mimicking the other older birds or those elders are teaching them how to be a chicken. And maybe it's a bit of both. But the upshot is they're beginning to act in ways which will ensure their continued survival around the larger chickens. And that's a relief. It does, however, raise an interesting question. Why were those young hens so socially backward that they would allow the older chickens to eat them alive without putting up a decent fight? So earlier in the week, I was walking around doing things around the farm, and then I had something of a light bulb moment. The two new birds had probably never encountered older chickens before. You know, it's also obvious from hindsight. They were raised from eggs in an incubator and most likely had been only ever kept with their own clutch. They didn't know anything better. Now this is efficient for the breeder, but it also raises birds who are social idiots. They simply had no idea how to be a proper chicken. I'm sure the now deceased miscreants sized up the youngsters and collectively came up with the decision that they were of such low quality that they had to go. You know, everyone makes bad decisions, and that's part of life. Well, that mystery at least is now resolved, and I'll certainly only purchase older point-of-lay chickens in the future. It seems the time of year for mysteries, and today I was in the bathroom, casually going about my business, when someone, maybe about 20 kilometres or 12 miles away, ignited a fire, as you do on a hot and windy day. It had been the warmest day in about 5 months, and the wind was blowing hard. It's been somewhat dry this year, and at that moment, a thought popped into my mind. Probably not good timing for a burn-off. Turns out, it actually wasn't a good day for a burn-off. We're up on the side of a mountain saddle, and from this eagle's eyrie, you could see that the warm northerly wind pushed that fire ahead into the wind, which is surprising, due to the sheer energy released by the dry vegetation. It was interesting to see because the fire would then catch up with the main front. As you can imagine, it got large very quickly. Luckily for everyone involved, the wind soon died down. That, combined with the work of about 18 fire trucks from volunteer fire brigades around the area, of which I used to be part of, by sundown, all that could be seen were mild wisps of smoke. As I'm typing this, the wind has picked up again, but this time from the cold south with a light bit of rain. Hope they're all doing okay out there, and I'd certainly hope that the locals learn some valuable lessons from this very public incident. You know, this is the second time in under a year such a thing has occurred near to that location. We did get some chance to clean up the area where the fallen tree had supplied us with an inordinate amount of firewood. Even the massive tree stump was ground out and the sawdust was spread around the area. It's all looking pretty neat now. There's still a bit of mess in that area, and given the nearby fire today, if conditions are appropriate in this coming week for a burn off, we'll clean up that lot a little bit more, maybe. All depends on the weather. It comprises the usual and expected forest mess there, so nothing too major. Observant listeners will note on the two next photos the many burn marks that are still on those trees dating back to the 1983 Ash Wednesday bushfire, which was the last fire that swept through this area. It's pretty nasty. I also managed to clean up the grass which had been growing near to trunks of the many fruit trees and the large citrus enclosure. It's all looking super neat in there now. You know, it's such a pretty time of year, and many of the fruit trees are now gaining some decent size and age. Interestingly, I'm discovering that the pollinating insects, usually the European honeybees, prefer the ornamental varieties of fruit trees to that of the fruit-producing ones. There's possibly something to do with the greater number of flowers, but I don't really know. One of the biggest ornamental trees here is the snow pear, which grows near to the chickens' enclosure, and that's usually the first to develop its leaves and the last to lose them before the winter. Standing a bit further back from that snow pear tree, you can see that there are many other fruit trees and plants which are only now slowly beginning to break their winter dormancy. We've got several orchards, and the sunnier orchard, the trees in that are now a little bit more advanced with their spring growth. The Japanese maples in particular look stunning here. It's now warm enough that the round raised garden beds which form the kitchen garden, they're getting enough energy so that the plants are growing. And by contrast, the insides of the greenhouse, they're feral with lush growth. And over the past few days, some of the radish plants in there have put on some flowers, so we're hopefully going to collect some seeds from that this year. We've got plenty of asparagus at this time of year, and that is really good because they taste excellent whether either boiled or grilled. Yummo. And hopefully there is no late frosts which may harm the early and cold temperate apricot and also the almond crop. The trees themselves will be fine, but any fruit will drop off the tree if a cold morning eventuates. Anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to have a listen, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I wish I'll see you all next week. Signing out. See ya.